All right, so you see the topic, it's fake news, which is also known as propaganda. And I'll be talking about why it works and how you can resist it and how you can help others resist it also. I'll not be talking in this shortened version very little about why people do it, why they propagandize. But that's a very, very important topic also that we should doing this. But you might wonder, how would a person that was 40 years an engineer, trained in science and law, and how do they know anything about psychology? Well, it turns out I've been intensely interested in psychology since I was 15 years old. Here's how that happened. I met a gal when I was that age, and I was really interested in her. And I found out she was really interested in psychology. So I became really, really interested in psychology. And I guess it worked because this November we'll be celebrating our 58th wedding anniversary. So psychology works. I'm a believer. All right, so really when you think about propaganda and people trying to manipulate your mind, you really have to spend time thinking about thinking, which happens to be the hallmark of what we are. If you asked a scientist, what are we? Well, what they call us Homo sapiens sapiens, and Homo means bipedal, somewhat hairless primate. And sapiens means in Latin wisdom, but I like to think about thinking. So basically, the first sapiens means we're the primates that think. But the second one says we spend time thinking about our own thinking and our thinking of other humans. It's important that we do so. The Homo sapiens, the plain ones, the only thought, even though they lasted a long time, they didn't improve over their time span. And Neanderthals, for example, if you look at archaeology, you find out that they were around for 100,000 years or some large number, and the tools never changed from beginning to end. They never thought about and tried to improve their thinking about tool making. And so, whereas we, took off like crazy once we started thinking about our own thinking. So, so that's what we're doing. And so to think about the mind, you have to have a model of it. How does it work? And turns out the human mind is the most complex thing in the universe. People that study complexity have concluded the brain is the most interconnected thing. It's the most complex thing in the whole universe. And so it's no wonder there have been various models of the mind. This book was written in 1981, very, very good book. And it summarizes 60 distinct models of how the human mind works, with various degrees of sophistication, various amount of utility, and the author goes over, how it was used and why it was used, and how helpful it was for whatever it was being used for. So there's quite a lot of that stuff. So So all right, so we want to model the mind. We have a lot to choose from. In fact, since 1981, there's another one that's very popular these days. It's called Thinking Fast and Slow. It's a wonderful book by Daniel Kahneman. He's a psychologist. Now, picture this. If you see down on the bottom there, he won the Nobel Prize, but not in psychology. He won it in economics. He won it because he basically showed that the model of our thinking that economists were using was wrong. Didn't work. The economists had assumptions about how we think about the stock market and the economy and this and that, and they were wrong. And he showed in a very helpful way how they were wrong and why it was wrong. And so he got the Nobel Prize in economics. All right. So he has the simplest possible model in terms of it's just two parts. All right, and there's a fast part and there's a slow part. All right, and it's what he shows about those two parts is the fast part, the unconscious mind that gives you an instant intuitive feeling is something I'll talk about a little bit later, more about it. It's great, but it is easily tricked, and it can't handle certain kinds of problems very well. The slow part, the reflective part, the part that where you dwell and I analyze things and think real hard about things, that has defects too. It's lazy. That's the big one. It's lazy, and it would rather not think very hard. It takes a lot of energy to think hard. People that study the metabolism that goes on when you're thinking hard, the whole brain lights up and uses lots of calories and so on. So the slow part is kind of lazy, and so these defects are kind of important and very important to talk about and think about. In fact, Kahneman, here's almost a quote from his introduction. He hopes that it will become common for people to stand around the water cooler during a break and talk about thinking. Talk about in ways that will help them, each person, identify and understand their thinking errors, identify them and understand why they happen and this and that. And he does that by providing a rich, precise language for discussing them. The book is wonderful. It was a bestseller for quite a while, and very, very useful. This is not the one I use. I think it takes one more level of complexity to examine the subjects or the issues that we're wanting to talk about. And basically it takes the slow part and breaks it into two pieces. All right. So but the overall strategy, no matter what model you end up liking to use and find useful, the overall strategy is really, good. First, understand the strengths and weaknesses of whatever the parts are you divide the brain functioning into, all right? And then use the strengths and avoid the weaknesses. It's really just common sense, applied common sense. All the heavy lifting has been done by the psychologists and so on. And they describe that in the various books I'm going to show you. All right, so that's this book. But now let's talk about the three-piece part that I kind of like. You've probably heard about left brains and right brains, and the TV series Star Trek was actually built on that idea. First off, the person that really popularized that, Roger Sperry, he ended up getting a Nobel Prize in 1981 for the work he did. He did it in the 50s and 60s, and Star Trek was one of the things that as soon as people started finding out about it, they started using the ideas in various ways. So the left brain personality was Spock, and here's some of the characteristics of them: logical, rational, somewhat detached, maybe uncaring, tends to draw things in, loves information and pulls it in and loves to think about it, and tends to think in words, also numbers. On the other side, reductionist, takes big problems, breaks them into pieces, thinks sequentially a lot, thinks systematically. In engineering projects, it could be called, we used to talk about periods of the project where we were doing convergent thinking, zeroing in on a final design, or divergent thinking, looking for solutions to issues we had. And the project would sequence through alternating periods of convergent and divergent thinking. So that's the left brain personality. And one thing about them, they tend to create boxes to think in. They take a problem and they confine it but with boundaries and stay within the problem, and they think inside those boxes and think very, very well inside those boxes. Okay, so here's the right brain personality. Notice how clever I am. I have the title, the right brain thing is on the right side. So I wanted you to see I have an artistic flair. That's my joke for the afternoon. All right. So the right brain person, intuitive. Some people say reflective, empathetic, reaches out. Different from the left brain, pulls in and draws in, tends to think in pictures, not in words. If you look at those two overheads, when you get the slides, you will get all these slides. When you look at those, you'll see they're kind of mirror images of each other. Rather than being reductionist, the right brain folks think holistically, think of a big picture. Divergent thinking, very creative, fun-loving. Invite them to parties all the time, people like that have that tendency. I myself, you can go online and see what your tendencies or your preferred options are in this regard. You take a test, takes about 15 minutes or something. And I have for the last, 40 years or 50 years, I answer 2/3 of the questions they ask, more or less left-brained, and 1/3 right-brained. That's been steady. I've been trying to become more balanced. It doesn't work. My preferences have stayed the same for, like I say, about at least 40 years. So anyhow, those are something, and it's easy to find out about this. So you don't have to go very far online, and you can find out about this subject, this way of describing the conscious mind. All right, and here's a possible illustration. You might notice that the talk radio seems to appeal to the left brain in us. It's all words because there's no pictures. Usually the talk show hosts are very logical. They spend longer time on each topic than TV folks do. And so talk radio appeals to left brain folks, and they're attracted to it. And the TV appeals to the right brain folks. They're visual, and they spend a short time on each topic and jump around, because right brain people seem to like change more than say left brain folks. Now, I'm not saying by that's why conservatives dominate talk radio and liberals seem to dominate TV, because people with both right brain and left brain tendencies are in both sides of the liberal conservative divide. But there's no doubt those media appeal to the different sides more than others. Okay. All right. So, but if you really are serious about wanting to understand left brain and right brain better, this is a fine book, the finest book on the subject there is. It's called The Master and the Emissary, The Divided Brain and the Making of the Western World. So that just like Marx attempted to explain the history of civilization in terms of oppression and materialism and oppression and the oppressed and that sort of thing, Ian McGilchrist says, you can have just as helpful and maybe more helpful description of the progression of Western civilization by looking at the ascendancy of one side or another over time periods. And the one thing he points out, the interesting thing is, by the way, he thinks Eastern civilization tends to be more balanced than Western folks. But the Western folks, our alphabet is our language is paragraphs and broken down into sentences and words and letters. It's reductionist, broken down into pieces, and we put them together into concepts. Whereas in the Eastern tradition, they use pictures. So Eastern, definitely the language is, this is right-brained with the pictures. Whereas Western people use alphabets, and they're more left-brained in their language. So, but this book is one of the most scholarly books I ever read in my life. There are 122 pages of fine print notes and references. And by fine, I mean it's like number 9 point. You have to have a magnifying glass sometimes to see it, it seems. But this is a very, very, very good book. Lots of good things in there. So the point is, if you want to find out about the conscious mind, you can go online and learn about it with the internet to some degree, or you can read this highly scholarly work and find out about it. Okay, so, but the most unfamiliar you're likely to be is with the unconscious mind. The unconscious mind, that's different from subconscious. Subconscious, if you have an analyst help you, you can find out what's in your subconscious eventually. Might take years, but you can find it out. It's extractable. By definition, you have no conscious access to what is termed by psychologists as the unconscious mind. So that's probably the least familiar to you, even though it's a very powerful part of our makeup as human beings. And so if you want to learn about that, I'm going to show you the covers of 5 books that deal with it in different ways. This first one, Malcolm Gladwell, very, very successful author. This book, Blink, was on the bestsellers. It was written in 2005, on the bestseller list for 4 years. And others of his books were on the bestseller list for years, like Tipping Point. And anyhow, it tells stories wonderfully, and you get to see the power of the unconscious mind. The subtitle is The Power of Thinking Without Thinking. That's Kahneman calls that System 1. That's the fast thinking. It happens in a blink sometimes. And it's very, very, and if you like storytelling, this is the book for you. All right, here's a couple more. To show the independence of the unconscious mind, why you don't have complete control of it, your conscious mind doesn't, is this book by a very well-regarded neuroscientist. The brain has a mind of its own, and he really means it. A mind of its own. You can't control it. This book is 41 essays. It's mostly about reflection and, in a sense, using the unconscious mind to examine and mull over things and do the slow thinking that in a sense, educates your unconscious mind. This one, A Mind of Its Own, same thing, is a delightful book. This author has a fantastic sense of humor, and it's filled with very, very good material too. Much more detailed about the actual experiments and things that prove the various assertions concerning it, concerning the unconscious mind. But I'd like to read, see this in the circle. It says, how your brain distorts and deceives. So here's what one of the things out of her, by the way, I'm going to send a mini book review of these 5 books to you as part of the package deal, since I can't cover them very well. All right, here's what she says about this. Your unscrupulous brain is entirely undeserving of your confidence. It has some shifty habits that leave the truth distorted and disguised. Your brain is vainglorious. It's emotional and immoral. It deludes you. It is pig-headed, secretive, and weak-willed. Oh, it's also a bigot. Much of what you think you know is not quite what it seems. So it's basically the point of this is not only do we not understand it very well, but it can be the source of misconceptions. And we'll talk about how that sort of thing happens. But the point is, that book is very entertaining. She has a tremendous sense of humor. Okay, these two are a little more seriously written, how we decide, because the unconscious mind is key to your decision making. And but this book, Strangers to Ourselves, it emphasizes that the title and this picture of a guy looking inside, trying to figure himself out, um, uh, is, um, uh, is truthfully portraying the difficulty in understanding it. But both of these books have lots of content, very well written, and can help you understand your unconscious mind. But if you distill all that, here's my picture, my representation of what the unconscious mind, or in Kahneman's term, System 1, what that is. All right, it's this is the thinker that's inside you as a thinker. So, I think if you think about this picture and remember this picture, and then look at the summary in the next slide, it tells you some of the key characteristics, it'll help you. All right, first off, you can't access it consciously. That's kind of a definition, all right? But you sense it. It doesn't talk to you in words. It's not very good with words, actually. It can't do word problems very well, and that sort of thing. It communicates with you with your sense. You'll feel it in operation. It is a marvelous pattern recognition, a machine kind of. It recognizes patterns very quickly and very well that your conscious mind takes a lot longer to realize. But the fact that it learns patterns means that repetition works on it. A lie told to it often enough becomes its truth. All right, that's one of the weaknesses of the unconscious mind. All right, and it's always watching. You can't turn it off. All right, it's watching everything you see, and it's looking for threats. It's looking for patterns. It's very, very interesting the way it works. But you can't turn it off. And as I say, it learns subtle things that you don't pick up faster than you do. Actually, the Blink starts out with an example of a U.S. Navy radar operator on a ship. All he looks at is a sweeping signal and blips. And there was one operator, this is during the Iraq War, one of those Middle East wars, and he sees blips heading towards the ship. And he has to decide, is that one of our pilots a little bit in trouble and separated from the rest coming in, or is it a cruise missile? If he decides one way, he'll kill the pilot. If he decides wrongly and lets the cruise missile go through, it'll maybe sink the ship. He had about a minute or so to make the decision, and he made the decision, and it was right. And the Navy took 2.5 years to try to figure out, how did he figure that out? He didn't know. It's a wonderful, marvelous example of how the unconscious mind learns patterns faster and better than you. So they did figure it out after a while. Okay. It trusts you. In other words, if you present to it pornography over and over and over again, it'll think pornography is okay. All right. It's easily tricked by repetition. All right. And as I said, it's you sense it, it responds emotionally. Anything that's outside its belief zone, all the patterns it believes, it'll signal that something's wrong here. But you have to watch what you feed it. If you feed it trash, it'll be trashy. If you feed it wonderful, virtuous things, it'll be virtuous, and that sort of thing. Okay. So here's the model. The top smaller part is the conscious part, all right? And the way the right brain works, the way healthy thinking works is The right brain brings in things from the real world, observations, theories, whatever it is, brings from the real world, and looks at them and more or less hands it off to the left brain, the left hemisphere, that does the analysis of it and then says, oh, I have this finally figured out, and it hands it back to the right brain. Is this right? Does this fit the big picture? And basically healthy thinking cycles iteratively through that kind of thing, and each cycle it more or less senses, does the unconscious mind think this is okay or not? Many people that talk about the decision making say, yeah, make charts and graphs of plus or minus, pros and cons of some decision you have to make, and study it and study it and study it, and when it's all over, just throw all the pieces of paper away and go with what feels good, because by that time your unconscious mind will have figured out what is good. All right, hopefully. All right, so that's the model we have. This is the pictorial representation of it, left brain, right brain, and the primitive, powerful, primitive, unconscious mind. And here's another reason. This is the only Christian reference I'll throw in for the Christians in the audience. I'll say, I'm a Christian, you know that. I wear generally when I give a talk, I have a lapel with a little cross on it. I want people to know where I'm coming from. And I say, and so for the Christians in the audience, here's something to think about. The left brain is something like God the Father. Logical, legalistic, kind of rules guy, a bit stern sometimes. Jesus is warm, empathy, reaches out, loves people right away. That's kind of like the right brain. And the Holy Spirit is quiet, doesn't talk to you in words, but you feel his presence, and that sounds a lot like the unconscious mind. I've shown this analogy to two ministers I really respect, and the first thing that out of their mouth was, "You realize, Ray, you're very close to a heresy." And then they named the heresy. I looked it up. So maybe one of the reasons this idea I haven't pushed very hard is I don't want to get accused of being a heretic, but I think there may be something to that image, the image and likeness. This may be a piece of the image and likeness in some vague kind of way. So anyhow, that's a kind of a tickler about that model, and it's one of the reasons I kind of like it. So. Okay, so now we'll switch to propaganda, and this is wisdom from Mark Twain. It's easier to fool people than to convince them that they have been fooled, and that is deep, profound wisdom, and we'll talk about why that is the case in a little bit. But okay, on the subject of propaganda, it has a long history in the world, but it really the starting point of U.S. In it, there were two books came out in the 1920s. Propaganda is one of the books, and it came out in 1928, and it's written by Edward Bernays, who's the nephew of Sigmund Freud, and this he's serious about propaganda and public relations and advertising and things like that. So here's some quotes about what his picture is of the utility of propaganda and why he does it and why he thinks it's a good thing. So his picture of the world is this: the world informed by, he calls it in this sentence, public relations, will be but a smoothly functioning society where all of us are guided imperceptibly throughout our lives by a benign elite of rational manipulators. Okay. All right. Walter Lippmann wrote the other big book that came out in the 20s, was 1922. His book was called Public Opinion. And he, a quote from him gives you an idea of what Bernays is talking about, because he's talking about the same thing. Basically, the model they have of society there are elites and there are the masses. And here's what Lippmann says about the masses. Okay. They are by and large incapable of lucid thought or clear perception. They're driven by herd instincts and mere prejudice, and frequently disoriented by external stimuli. They're not equipped to make decisions or engage in rational discourse. That's what he thinks the masses are like. Okay, he says, picture that the Bernays has, we should be governed, our minds molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. These invisible governors are a heroic elite who coolly keep it all together, organizing chaos, much as God did in the beginning. That's a quote from this guy. He has a God delusion, all right? And he wants to run things and manipulate. I mean, that's what he thinks. And they think it's a good thing, all right? You think, oh, well, that's from the 1920s. And so who cares about ancient history? Well, the book on the right, Nudge, let's see, what year was I? Let's see, 2000 something, I don't know. One of the authors, Cass Sunstein, was a prominent member of the Obama administration for, I think, the whole 8 years. Let's see, what did it call? Oh, 2008. But here's a little bit of what Nudge is all about. He says, let's see, what page? I better look, make sure I get the right page. Yeah, page 3. There's a little bit of a quote here. He says, what we really need to have are people he calls choice architects. A choice architect has the responsibility for organizing the context in which people make decisions. Okay. It helps focus our attention in particular directions. All right, that sounds not too bad. Okay, and the movement he's trying to foster here, he calls libertarian paternalism. All right, now the libertarian part means in general people should be free to choose things. Okay, the paternalistic part of it is that they will be, let's see, the choice architects will influence people's behavior in order to make their lives longer, healthier, and better. Okay, it'll steer people's choices in directions that will improve their life. All right. He says, after all, individuals make pretty bad decisions. So we will push them in directions so that they make decisions they would have made if they had paid full attention, possessed complete information concerning whatever it is, okay, had unlimited cognitive abilities, and complete self-control. In other words, not emotional, complete self-control. He's describing what he thinks he is. That's the choice architects. They pay full attention, they have complete information, they have unlimited cognitive abilities and complete self-control. All right, so is there any other quote here? Yeah, so that's enough of the quotes, but anyhow, you get the idea. These people are serious, and there's a lot of them, and they work hard to manipulate our minds. All right. So that's what, and the point is, like any tool, it sounds good in these books. It sounds wonderful. We're going to improve people's lives, make them longer, healthier, all that. But any knowledge can be misused. And so the next slide summarize some of the stuff so that you don't have to buy the book to read the quotes. There's a couple of the things. The first three are what I covered. Okay, but the bottom, here's the one. Okay, but what if it's used, this choice architect theory kind of thing, to define the context in which people form beliefs? And define the context means limit the information, control the information. And I have two examples, personal examples that I know of where that's the case. All right. One had to do with, I think I might have mentioned this in an earlier discussion group. The San Diego Foundation some years ago did some work to talk about what should we do about the density of housing. And what it resulted in was a survey, and your choices were dense, two forms of denser, and really dense. Okay, those were the choices. It was skewed towards what they really were after. And so that many of us, I was part of a Tea Party. We sent letters and we called them and everything. I don't know if they even heard us very much, but the point is those were some choice architects in practice. All right. Now, I was asked by a school board director. Was kind of anxious about the Common Core, and so I attended the school board meetings. And one of the school board people asked me to review an AP history book, looking for bias and things like that, and I did. And I'll send you my report that I wrote to the school board on it, and it shows how this bottom line is done. Define the context in which people form beliefs. In this case, the people are students, 11th graders. All right, and basically it's an essay. It's called document-based essay, and the kids are given extracts from documents, and they are to use those to form an answer, essay answer to a question. The question that blew my mind, and I used as an example in the paper or the report I wrote, was to what extent did democratic principles lead America to war? And they extracted from the Declaration of Independence and in various documents, different wars. Okay, here's what they chose. On the left is the document extract they chose for the Iraq Operation Iraqi Freedom. It's only a picture. Document number 7. It's only a picture. A U.S. Army soldier on guard at the Ramada oil fields in South Iraq. What possible conclusion about why America went to war could one draw from that picture? The only conclusion you could draw is we went to war for oil, and that was one of the propaganda issues that were well publicized in the paper. By the way, I researched that, and I found industry reports. It showed that the imports from Iraq of oil for several years in front of the war, during the war, and after the war, we're all about the same. They all bounced around from 3 to 5%. It was a little bit lower during the war. So if we went to war in Iraq for oil, we are the stupidest people on earth because we didn't get any extra. It was the same. It just blew my mind that picture was there. Now, here's the picture I think they should have had. Picture of a woman voting, an oppressed woman in a Muslim society voting. That should have been shown. And when I gave my tirade to the school board, one of the teachers in the audience, a guy said, "Hey, I was there. I helped guard the streets so they wouldn't get shot when they went to vote." He says, "Yeah, that was a wonderful thing." Anyhow, people applauded him and thanked him for his service and all that. The point is, if they wanted to be objective and student friendly, choice architects, they would have shown both of those things. What do you think? What do you conclude from this? Anyhow, that you'll see the report I wrote. All right. So here's another book that's very helpful. And I will send you a full book report that I put on Amazon for it. It's called The Intelligence Trap. The subtitle that he used, the first couple editions, Why Smart People Make Dumb Mistakes. I think some marketing person said, you want smart people to buy this book, and to say they do dumb things is not probably as wise as it seemed at first. So they changed the subtitle to Revolutionize Your Thinking and Make Wiser Decisions. Anyhow, it's a great book. You'll see my book review of it. Okay, so in summary, why does it work? Well, it's mostly the repetition part, narrative, and people tend to have a confirmation bias, other things. There are other reasons, as you can read in some of these books and talk about. But the point is, the repetition ends up resulting in people brainwashing. Sometimes they brainwash themselves. Sometimes other people brainwash them. All right, and you may remember about Pavlov's dogs, or maybe you remember one of the movies, The Manchurian Candidate. All right, Pavlov dogs. Let's see, what year was that? Yeah, he got the Nobel Prize for his work with dogs in 1904, by the way. So it's old stuff. He would ring a bell, feed the dogs, they slobbered. Ring a bell, feed the dogs, they slobber. After a while, he could ring the bell, don't give them anything, they still slobber. And so people get conditioned the same way, same mechanism. Manchurian Candidate was about the POWs captured and taken to Manchuria. They were in the Korean War, captured, taken, and they were brainwashed. And they came back, they lived ordinary lives until they received a phone call that had a key word in it that turned them into homicidal killers. So that's a wonderful, suspenseful movie that gives an example. And here's a book on brainwashing. I don't have this book. I can't recommend it. I didn't read it. I felt I knew enough about it without reading this book. But if you want to, think about and on the side here, it says what some of the steps are in her view of it. But the net result is this. You end up on the left side of your brain, all right, stuck with a model of some kind. And it could be an ideology. Where the nodes represent concepts and there's relationships, the lines represent the relationships between the concepts. It's a closed system. It all works. It's a cohesive, coherent, logically consistent narrative that tells one story. And there's no room, there's no attachment points for any ideas that don't fit the narrative. And people get locked in their that left brain mode with that, and kind of locked down. And you can say something to them, and they might not hear it. If they hear it, it won't register. There's no place for them to retain it. They'll reject it out of hand, no matter what it is, and they're brainwashed. And very often, a person will just be brainwashed on a few areas of their mind, and other areas will be perfectly normal people, perfectly healthy, normal people. All right. So there are a couple signs for, I'm not sure I have that in there. I have to check later, that you might be brainwashed on one or more topics. And one is, if somebody says an idea to you, and you instantly get a reaction. In other words, you don't think about it. You don't cogitate on it. It's an instant emotional reaction. That means it's coming from the unconscious, the left side unconscious part of your being. All right, instantaneous. That's a sign you might be brainwashed if you have that. For example, I think there are some liberals, if I was here and I put on my MAGA hat, red MAGA hat, instantly they'd be angry. Instantly they'd have a deep, visceral dislike for me, or at least my hat. And there are other things. that trigger people. So if you have a trigger that affects you emotionally, instantaneously, you may be brainwashed. It's worth thinking about. All right. That's one of the signs. Another sign, if you're talking about a subject, foreign trade or I don't know, something, and somebody brings up a fact that from a logical standpoint, this could relate to this problem. We should understand it. And they instantly reject it. Yeah, it's wrong. I don't believe it. Rah, rah, rah. That kind of thing. That's a sign of being brainwashed. They're rejecting new information that might be helpful. And it just rejecting it outright. Anyhow, there are a few signs, and you can figure out what some of them are yourself, I'm sure. Okay, so the thing is, what do you do about it? Well, one of the things, because repetition is such a powerful brainwashing set of events, don't try to keep up with the breaking news. I personally, for big stories, big news stories, I wait at least 3 days. And you'll notice consumer protection laws say that's a cooling off period, 3 days. Give a person's unconscious mind the time to process whether this new thing fits into any existing pattern you have. Mull it over, sleep on it, that kind of thing. But so I don't pay attention to big news until at least 3 days, and kind of thing. But I read one study where it said the people most susceptible to being misled by news are the ones that keep their nose to the screen, and they are up to date on every new breaking thing. And the part of it is the effort to keep up with everything as it comes out. You don't have time to reflect. You don't have time to process it. You don't have time to do any slow thinking. All you do is maybe catch a pattern or something, and you're teaching your unconscious mind that pattern that the news people constructed for you. All right. So and you think about it, as a citizen in the political area, you vote every 2 years, and so just keep track of the big things and realize you don't have to be able to answer every question, the big currents, not the little ripples, because you only vote every 2 years. So in other words, slow down your thinking and even your information retrieval, so to speak. One thing that helps, if you're talking with somebody, focus on, or learning things, focus on the philosophies or the ideologies and the actions of candidates, and not on the identities and the images being portrayed, their apparent personalities. You may remember in 1984 was a book called The Image Makers. It's how to make yourself look good. And there are a lot of people that know how to do that. And so don't worry about personalities. I mean, the battle is between ideologies. Let's see. Okay, so one of the ways to resist is as I said, because rapid changes prevent the slow, deep, systematic thinking. Don't do that. You won't have iterations of the right brain taking something in, the left brain processing it and logically analyzing it, and then handing it back to the right brain for more reflection and to see if it fits in with the big picture of the world that you have. And then another iteration of it, and wait till you feel good about it. That's slow thinking. You want to do that. Another thing you can do to resist it, I think, is the Sabbath idea is great, I think, and partly because of it gives you time for reflection. It can be used for reflection, and be intentional about your thinking, and set aside some time, maybe weekly, maybe daily. I say as a minimum, I mean, at least 3 days apart, so maybe bi-weekly, monthly, a new Sabbath, to just reflect on the news and the currents and what's going on, and just kind of let it percolate in your mind. It's good to read what I call news Bibles. That is, things that deal with the fundamentals of the civilization we're in, so that you bounce these new things that are coming along and perhaps new ideas with what were the founding principles. And the Federalist Papers are absolutely wonderful. Addresses by some of the founders. Washington's farewell address when he left Washington after, when he was no longer president. Wonderful address. That kind of Lincoln's inaugural addresses, that kind of thing. Democracy in America. That's objective from a Frenchman. His take on what made America tick when it wasn't, in a sense, infected by a lot of new ideologies. So, and that helps ground what you're, how you're assessing the information. And because America was founded on Judeo-Christian principles, I'm not sure this is why she does it, but it was founded on those principles. She gets a lot of her news from Christian TV channels. I personally get a lot of my news about America from Israel. I sign up for some of the Israel newsletters, and they give a fairly objective view. And one of the reasons I like it is Israel is kind of a liberal country. So it's not slanted conservative, and I'm already slanted conservative. So I kind of like the reporting that comes out of Israel, and so that's one of the sources I use to help balance my thinking, because the whole problem is when your thinking gets unbalanced. That's when you get brainwashed. That's when you get rejecting ideas and don't think hard. Okay. So I think I went over this, the trigger words and new ideas bouncing off. I guess this was a little bit out of order. Now, here's a strategy. If you think you're talking with somebody, whether it's in evangelism or politics, and you're hitting on something where they have some signs that suggest maybe they are brainwashed, or maybe you are brainwashed, move the discussion from politics to maybe psychology, or maybe philosophy, or maybe history. Don't address the brainwashed area directly right away. Work on some ancillary area to get the juices, to get the thinking juices going. There was a reason to believe scholar talk that I listened to last night it was on education, indoctrination, and propaganda. And one of the teachers, a 30-year veteran teacher of political, national security kinds of classes, he says, many of the kids first come to him, and it's clear that they are somewhat brainwashed on American politics. So he gives them problems about Southeast Asia situation and has them go over the process I'm about to tell you about. Or Africa or some other place. Get them away from America. Get them away from the area that they're brainwashed into an area that they can maybe think more freshly about, where they're not fixated. And then he gets them to, loosen up the thinking processes, and then later comes back to American situations. And he says that seems to work. And so this idea of diverting away from the hot buttons to a cool area of the mind, so to speak, is a good one. Now, one thing, I've actually tried this with a person. I only see him once a year, so the discussion goes slowly, and it's better to talk in person. Point out that brainwashing is easily done. You have the signs and say, I have some signs of it. Do you have them? And talk about that, and get talking about psychology and say, you know something? we can't tell if we are brainwashed. Both of us could be brainwashed on some things, and we can't detect it ourselves. It's just something, we can't by introspection figure it out. We need others to help us. So how about we help each other? Make a buddy out of this person. Help. Let's deal with some subject. Social Security or some issue, taxation, whatever, some issue, and try to find out the truth about it. And try to be systematic about our thinking. And we may find out that we're both somewhat brainwashed because of the sources of information we have ended up using. So won't that be fun, and this and that? And maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. He hasn't said no. And I showed him the book Intelligence Trap last time I was visiting. I just didn't push it because I couldn't, because I was moving and everything. So I'm going to take it up again later, I guess, towards the end of the year, maybe. I'll be back there. Okay, so if you want to get systematic, the most systematic way you can get of analyzing complex things, and I don't recommend it, it's way more sophisticated than you want to use, but the concept is good. It's called analysis of competing hypotheses. It's something used by the CIA. There are books on it. There's a free, I think I have there's a free web software you can get if you want to actually look at it some. But it's a tool to aid judgment on important issues. And here's the point is to help the analyst overcome or at least minimize cognitive limitations. So that's what it does. It's an 8-step procedure. It's based on the deep understanding of cognitive psychology, and avoid the common analytical pitfalls. By the way, the book Intelligence Trap will tell you what all those pitfalls are, and other books will do that too. Kahneman's book has a lot in there. All right, and here's the software you can download from the Xerox Palo Alto Research Center to do it if you care to. But what it really comes down to is you end up having competing hypotheses for whatever the issue is. All right. And you make a column, pros and cons, things that support the hypothesis, things that are inconsistent with the hypothesis for each of the hypotheses. And you get as much of that information as you can. You have all these things. And then you just kind of mull it over, examine your preconceptions, and examine a bunch of your thinking relative to each of these things. Very, very systematic. But here's a key about how you weight the supportive information versus the non-supportive information. And it came from our friend Jeff. his example of the Sudoku puzzle that he had right except for just two things wrong, and it was the rest all added up perfectly, but it didn't work. Then he found the correct solution, and the key thing is what he found out: there were 38 boxes were incorrect when compared to the true solution. Okay, now this is a very complex thing. Every number you put in there affects all the ones around it in each of these sub-quadrants kind of thing, and the column and the row that you put in. It's very complex, and things ripple, ideas ripple, so it's complex. And what does it say? An apparent 2% discrepancy, an apparent 2% challenge to the theory. The real situation, it was 47% or whatever. What was it? Yeah, 47%. There's a magnifying. You should weigh the cons much more heavily than the pros. And isn't that what Karl Popper taught about falsification? You have this wonderful theory. It explains 58,000 experiments and all that. One key experiment, it's inconsistent. You have to revise the theory. There's a magnifying effect. So when you do this with a person, remember to pay attention mostly to the cons and examine them very, very carefully, because those are the ones that help lead you to the truth. All right. So, okay, so what is truth? What is truth? And what I'm suggesting with my three-piece model of the mind is there are three tests for truth, not one. First, you have to look at whatever it is, whatever your solution is, let's say, with the left brain, granular logic, granular look, reductionist, look at all the pieces one by one, all that sort of thing. And if it passes that one, then you also look at the right brain, the big picture. How does this fit with other bigger pictures? How does this do things? And then say, okay, yeah, it does seem true. And then how you feel about it. Because your unconscious mind has the accumulated history of all the patterns you ever observed and your characteristic responses. I bolded the character part because the unconscious mind is where your character is. And that you're bringing that to bear on the thing. And so there's three tests. And if any one of these is wrong, it may be wrong. So keep digging. And that's the model that shows, how to iterate around. I just put there as a kind of a reminder of how to iterate around. There's a couple of tricks that I think help to address whether or not you're really trapped in your thinking, or the person you're talking with, they're thinking, in a box. And one is, here's the box, draw it bigger and see if you still think about the subject the same. And here's an example, abortion question. If you only think of the woman and nothing else but the woman, you may come to one conclusion. But if it turns out she's married to a loving husband that desperately wants a male child because he's from a culture that values male children, that and the unborn is a male, that'll change a bit of how you think about it. And if there are grandparents involved, now if it's a country that really needs kids because the birth rate is below replacement rate, then that'll affect it too. The bigger you draw the circle, if that changes your thinking, watch out. And if you're a Christian, the biggest circle is what does God think about it? All right. Another kind of draw the circle bigger idea is if there's an idea of how to behave, ask yourself, what would the world be like, or would I like living in the world if everybody followed the rule or idea under discussion? Like if somebody says, like I was at a juvenile center and talked about certain things, and the guy says, "Oh, run down and take what I want." Really? And then I brought up this idea. Well, what if everybody had that idea? Just run and take what you want. What kind of world do you think you'd have? How long do you think you'd live? That kind of thing. Anyhow, so that idea of universality of ideas, of truth, might be helpful. Okay, I've talked long enough.